This is the Sony Xperia 1 Mark II. It's designed for creative types who are really into photography and videography. So, to test it out, I made a film with it. When I tell someone about the Sony Xperia 1 Mark II, their reaction is usually, Sony still makes phones? Yeah. Now granted, this isn't aimed at the masses. It's designed to give you more control so you can get the absolute best photos and videos and play them back on the absolute best display. And Sony comes pretty close on all those accounts. With the Xperia 1 Mark II, I can use it more like this, a Sony mirrorless camera. Now look, there is a lot to talk about with this phone, but I want to focus on three areas: the cameras, the screen, and then a Jeopardy-like potpourri round hitting some of the other big details on the phone. When we think of phone cameras, the iPhone 11 Pro and the Google Pixel 4 stick out because they can take a moment and use processing to make a photo that looks as best as it can. All you do is tap the shutter button and the phone's computational chops does the rest. So why would you want anything else? Well, there's a lot of people like me out there who want to take more creative control over the way my photos and videos look, as well as how I capture them. And that's why the Sony Xperia 1 Mark II is a real damn treat, because it lets me do both. There are three cameras on the back: a wide-angle main camera, an ultra-wide-angle camera, and a telephoto camera, all of which have a 12-megapixel resolution. Now, the telephoto camera has a lens that is equivalent to a 70mm on a full-frame camera, meaning that the telephoto camera is actually a telephoto camera. There are three apps that take advantage of these cameras. There's the default Xperia Android app, as well as the Photo Pro and Cinema Pro apps, which give you detailed control over every aspect of photo and video capture. If you own a Sony Alpha mirrorless camera, then the Photo Pro app is going to look very familiar, and that's because it mimics the same controls found on the camera. I can control exposure compensation, focus, I can control metering, I can dial in my shutter speed and ISO. There's even a histogram and an on-screen horizon level. I can even turn on and off perhaps one of the best features on the camera, eye autofocus. What this is it identifies a face in your scene and then locks in on your subject's eyeball. It is jaw-dropping to see how this thing works. And what makes it more fun is it also works on animals. Now, I was not able to get the little green box to lock in on Cheddar the cat's eyeball, but I'm working with Sony to figure out why it's not working on my review unit. Photos for the Xperia are great. There's lots of detail and wonderful colors. Even photos taken indoors in medium and low light situations are pretty good with low image noise. Then there's the Cinema Pro app, which I thought the best way to test that was just to make a movie with it. So I wrote a short film and filmed all the footage on the Xperia 1 Mark II with the Cinema Pro app. Cinema Pro is not the first app to bring video-centric controls to a phone, but I like the way this app is laid out. It makes it easy to change ISO and shutter angle, to do manual focus, as well as to automate a manual focus pull between two subjects, which is really cool. While making my film, the shutter button was an essential tool, especially since I was filming myself a lot of the time and I couldn't see the screen. But I was pretty confident when I pushed the shutter button and heard the chime that my performance was being recorded. Another thing I like about the phone is, compared to a mirrorless camera, it's a lot smaller. So that meant I could put the phone in different locations to find a unique angle or a different perspective. Also, the left side of the phone doesn't have buttons and is relatively flat, so sometimes it's able to stand it up on its own to capture a scene. Now, sometimes it also fell over. In the app, Sony provides a number of film looks which are pretty fun to experiment with. For my film, I stuck with one look, the Venice CS look. That made post-production really easy, especially when it comes to adjusting color, white balance, and exposure to get the clips to match each other. I should note that videos are recorded in an H.265 codec with 10-bit color. I had an absolute blast filming with the Xperia 1 Mark II. The 4K out of the app is really sharp. That said, I should note that the app tops out resolution and frame rate wise at 4K 60 frames per second or HD at 120 frames per second. Also, I wish the Cinema Pro app had a little more pro in it. For example, I wish I could punch in on the viewfinder when I'm manual focusing. I wish there was a flat color profile. I mean, S-Log Mobile has a really nice ring to it, Sony. Also, if you're filming outdoors, you're going to need a neutral density filter. And that's because a phone has a fixed aperture, at least this one does, and that means I'm really controlling my exposure with the shutter angle and ISO. And at some point, they both bottom out, and a lot of the times, my scene is still overexposed. I also wish I could have access to the metadata for the clips I film, even if it's kept in the Cinema Pro app. That way, if I have to redo a scene or redo a shot, I can find those settings and recreate it quickly. A histogram like the one found in the Photo Pro app would be great. A waveform would be even better. Also, focus peaking and zebras would be really nice. Now, I realize my wish list is starting to sound like the feature list of the third-party app Filmic Pro. Fundamentally, Filmic Pro and Cinema Pro are very different apps. Part of what I like about the Cinema Pro app is its light pro touch. And I don't mean that to sound like a knock. Young, scrappy filmmaker Patrick would be overwhelmed with an app like Filmic Pro, whereas the Cinema Pro app would be a fun place to get my feet wet and get the ideas I have in my head and actually capture them on camera. Ultimately, the Cinema Pro and Photo Pro apps are tools that make filmmaking and photography on a phone feel legitimate. More so than the LG V60, heck, even more so than the iPhone 11 Pro. So let's talk about the 6.5-inch OLED screen on the Xperia. It is one of the best displays I've ever seen on a phone. It has 4K resolution, it has HDR, colors look amazing, photos and videos are so sharp. And also it has a 21:9 aspect ratio, so it's really tall and thin, and that's great for like scrolling apps like Instagram and Twitter. Watching Netflix on this screen is an excellent experience because most films are shot in a wide aspect ratio, so they fill the screen rather well. That said, the Netflix mobile app does not support 4K streaming at this time, which is a big bummer. Then there's YouTube, which most videos there are 16:9, aka there's big black bars on the left and right side of anything you're watching. You can zoom in, but you do risk maybe cutting off someone's head, which is kind of rude. Something we see on other flagship phones that this screen lacks is a high refresh rate. Now, the way Sony explains it is a screen of this size, this quality, that has 4K resolution and a high refresh rate, well, they just don't make them. But you gotta wonder how amazing that screen would be, right? Instead, there's a 90 Hz rate software equivalency, aka it just basically reduces motion blur. It works okay, but I think Sony made the right choice by going with the 4K resolution instead of going for a lower resolution with a higher refresh rate screen. And now we get to my Jeopardy-like potpourri section where I can hit a lot of the features on this phone really quickly and just let you know my thoughts. The first being that this has a Snapdragon 865 processor, and in my testing, it scored on par with all the other phones that have a Snapdragon 865 processor. It has 5G, just not in the United States. The fingerprint reader is built into the power button on the side of the phone, which is a great location. It works okay, but sometimes there's a slight millisecond of a lag. It runs Android 10, and Sony hasn't added much software-wise to the phone, which is fantastic. There's a feature called Side Sense, which, I'll be honest, I found it quite aggravating to use, and I just turned it off. It's got wireless charging, yay! It has decent stereo speakers, yay! It has a headphone jack, yay! And it comes with headphones, double yay, yay, yay! The selfie camera isn't great, but there is that shutter button, which combined with eye autofocus would allow you to take a pretty decent selfie with the rear camera. You just can't see yourself. It has a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, and in my use, which I was filming a lot with this phone, it made it to the end of the day, but there wasn't much left in the tank. That said, I'm still running tests with the batteries, and check out my full review on CNET.com for any updates. And that brings me to price. In the US, the Xperia 1 Mark II costs $1,200. Now, if you're already in the Sony Alpha mirrorless camera ecosystem and you're looking for a new phone, this could be a really good fit, especially if you have the budget. But for me, I'm a journalist and a scrappy short filmmaker, and the price is just too high. Now, the original Xperia 1 last year cost $1,000, and if this new one cost the same price, I would have no hesitancy recommending it for filmmakers and phone photo enthusiasts. Now, Sony does have a pretty sweet pre-order deal where when you buy the phone, it will come bundled with a pair of WF-1000 XM3 wireless headphones. that normally costs $230. It doesn't drop the price at all, but you get a little something more for the price. So if you're gunning for this phone, I definitely recommend doing that pre-order deal. And now here's my short film that I shot with the Xperia 1 Mark II using the Cinema Pro app. It's called I, Robber. Enjoy. So that's all I have for the Sony Xperia 1 Mark II review. I want to know what you guys think about this phone. What do you think of the